We will be right back. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm trying out a new mic audio system today, so let me know if it sounds better than usual, and I'll stick with it. We've got Louise George Kittaka in Tokyo, right?
Yes, I'm on the western side of Tokyo. Good
Thanks for
morning.
joining so much, Louise.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
And originally, you're from New Zealand, is that right?
That's right. I'm from the North Island of New Zealand, about 2 hours south of Auckland, from the dairy area, so the cow town.
I know
Beautiful
it's
place.
hard to remember why you came or how you came to Japan. It's such a long time ago, but could you give us a brief introduction about what
Okay,
you've
it's
been
a,
up to?
a
Or
fairly,
yeah.
fairly classic story. Came, met someone and stayed. I had done Japanese as my major at university, so I was keen to use it in my job. I got a job offer. I was only 20. I got a job offer from a small company that brought me to Japan to train with the idea of going back to work for them in New Zealand. Things went a little sideways when I met my future partner at a party. We got engaged after 4 dates, I think it was. We met at a Christmas party. We were engaged by New Year's. We had a year apart when I did go back to fulfill my obligations to the company, and we got married when I was 22. So we celebrate our 30th anniversary next year, actually. So it's been a while. So
And
here we
your
are.
book that we're talking about today, which has just been published, of course, is connected to raising kids in Japan.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
I,
how many kids do you have?
I have three. It sometimes felt like more than that. I have a son who is 25 and back in Tokyo working, and I have two daughters who are now 23 and coming up 20. The youngest celebrates her coming of age in January, and they're in New Zealand right now, so they're still pursuing their university degrees over there. Yes.
Could you tell us a bit about how the book project came about?
Sure. Well, if I can just, shameless plug here. The book is called Intercultural Families and Schooling in Japan Experiences, Issues, and Challenges. I had to read it to make sure I got it right. And it's co edited with Melody Laurie Cook. Melody is a fellow mom, she's Canadian and a friend as well. And essentially, we're two moms raising kids in Japan. And we had known each other for a while. We worked on some kind of media project I'd had. She'd given me some input. So I knew of her, she knew of me. And she is a full-time academic with a lot of credentials. So she knows very much the academic side, but she also writes the media, mostly about adoption and fostering. I also teach at university, though it's not my main thing. My main thing is writing. So we each had a foot in each other's respective worlds, and we had a mutual respect for each other's body of work. And she approached me about the book. It is about, it's written by parents. So everybody who's written for the book, all the chapter authors are parents themselves, and they're approaching it from an academic standpoint, but is written in such a way we hope that people who are regular parents will enjoy it too. So it will satisfy a lot of people, researchers, people working in universities, people working with bicultural families, or intercultural families, returning kids, and of course, most of all, parents like us raising kids in Japan, whether they happen to have a Japanese partner or whether they're both from overseas themselves. There are many different kinds of people who've written for us. So we're hoping that it will appeal to a very wide range of people. And to our knowledge, there's nothing like that out there. And one of the problems when we were collating the book and trying to get a publisher was that it was very hard to say, what is your audience? You're not just writing for academics, but you aren't just writing it for the layperson, so to speak. So our issue was trying to find a publisher that would embrace our vision and be excited about what we were doing. So we were very fortunate that we eventually found a home with this wonderful publisher, Canlin and Minard, and it took us 5 years to find them. We tried several other publishers, and we got things like, who are these people? Like a lot of us had published before, but not really in the academic side. So it was, who are these people? One of them lost our actual draft, so it was, where is the draft? Another one was, what is your message? We don't really understand. That was a more of a intercultural issues type of publishing company. So we had all these things like, who are these people? Where is the draft? What are you trying to do? And it was getting frustrating, but we just kept plugging away. And then finally we found Jo at Handlin Minot, and she was just wonderful. She's like, yes, I get it. I'm excited. I know what you guys are trying to do. And she took our vision and she just went with it, and we were so grateful. So now we have this book. It's been a long road, a very long road. We had some personal ups and downs. My husband had a cancer diagnosis 3 years ago. 3 years ago this month, actually, pancreatic cancer. Melody herself had some serious health issues. Both are doing fine. Both of us lost our fathers along the way. So, it was like plugging away, doing a little bit here and there. We'd have bursts of activity and then a few moments when it would go quiet for a while. And we're so grateful to all our chapter authors as well who really stuck with us, because I know it was frustrating for them too, but they believed in us to bring it to fruition, and we did. So we're very excited about it.
That's great.
Yeah.
We have a few people joining. Mary on Periscope says hi. Thanks for
Hi,
joining,
Mary.
Mary. And Ethan Thomas on YouTube says, congratulations, Louise, on the book.
Thank you. Thank
Um,
you, Ethan.
should we go through each part and you can introduce the different parts? So it looks like part one, finding your own way, part two, dealing with the Japanese school system. So, what would people find in part one?
Part one is okay. Maybe I'll open the book and have a look so I don't get it wrong.
Yeah, it
we
says,
have
yeah, finding
we
your
have
own way. Oh, just a little mention. In the description below, there should be a link and a discount code, which Louise has offered from the publisher. So if you're interested in the book, you can get it 50% off until the end of the year if you follow
it's a great
that code.
deal. So
Yeah, great deal.
It is available in print as well from Amazon if you prefer. This is obviously what I have here. And as you can tell, one of the girls on the cover has a mask on, which at the time we didn't know was going to be an issue, of course. But this book, it just came out just ahead of Corona, really. So but we thought that was kind of ironic that one of the girls on the cover has a mask on. So well, we have 11 chapters. So one of them is by Melody, my co-editor. One is by me. And the first section, Finding Our Own Way, is chapters about parents who have a slightly different take. Parents who have a unique, for example, one of them is a single dad, which is not someone you hear from a lot. A single dad who has primary care of his 2 kids. So another one was about making room for the minority culture. I think a lot of us would relate to that. A woman whose kids are in the Japanese system, but who has somehow left room for her own culture along the way, and how she did that. There's a couple, like a husband and wife, neither of whom are Japanese, are written about bringing their culture with their children when both kids are in all 3 kids are in Japanese school. And then there was a woman in the same situation, 2 foreign parents with a child being raised in Japan in a special school which aimed to have English and Japanese, and how that was with her child who was still in the Japanese system. So I'm going through it very quickly, I know. Part 2 is more, I guess, sort of like particular themes you might encounter. One was homework, how 2 mothers dealt with homework. One was some children who did spend time overseas at a high school, and how their literacy that they'd achieved with their mother while attending Japanese school had helped and been transferred over to their school overseas, which happened to be in Australia. And there was an interesting chapter about Japan's overseas school systems for kids who leave on mostly transfers with their parents, and how they deal with those schools and when they come back to Japan. So that might not be what you think of for kids like ours, bicultural kids, but there may be parents who decide to do that when they take the kids out of the country, put them in Japanese school overseas so they can slot back in when they come in. And the last chapter is coping with challenges. So we have a mother with a child with hearing issues. We have a dad with a child who has autism. And then we have, this is the chapter by Melody, my co-editor, helping your adopted or foster child succeed. And finally, I have the ending chapter, which is writing about taking our kids out of the system altogether and putting them in school in New Zealand for high school. Not because they weren't doing well, not because we didn't like the system here. There was no one big issue. It just seemed that it was a better fit for our son. And then what you do for one, you must be prepared to do for the others. They might not want to do it, but you have to offer them the chance, I believe. I think that's very, as a parent, you must offer them the same chances, even if they don't take them. At least they had them. And as it happened, all 3 decided to follow that path. So I wrote about taking them out of Japan, send them to New Zealand, some of the issues and aha moments, challenges that came out from that. When we started the book, I only had two overseas, and by the time the book came out, the youngest had graduated from high school and in university. So there was, quite a big span in that time with our family, just as it was for everybody who contributed. Um,
And you've written about sending your kids to schools abroad for Japan Times and
Right,
other.
right. This was kind of the catalyst for my chapter. To be honest, I wasn't originally going to write a chapter. Neither Melody nor I thought we would. I don't know why we thought that. I guess we just thought it would be easier to have other people do it, and we would edit. That was the original pitch. And then one of the people who was signed up had some family problems, so she had to pull out. And Melody writes, she as an academic, this is kind of her world, her. So she was able to bring a project that she had sort of already had in mind for a chapter. But for me, who is not an academic writer, the last time I wrote an academic paper was really for my master's when I was in the US. I have written sort of for somewhat academic journals, but not. They were more parenting things again they were a little bit not too strict about having all your references, that kind of thing. But to write in a purely academic style for me was a struggle in the beginning. So I knew my story was good and I know I write well, but to frame that in an academic context was the challenge. But I'm super happy with how it turned out. And I realized as I was editing other people's chapters, well, hey, I've done this much research for articles that I've written. I could turn that into an article. At the time, I thought, well, I didn't sign up to do a chapter, so I won't. But halfway through, one of our mentors said, well, hey, where's your chapter, Louise? And she kind of sowed the seeds. And I thought, you know what, I can try. And it was a struggle. I think all of us struggled in some ways. But I did it, and it came out really well. If I say so myself, I'm super happy with what I produced.
That's great.
So yeah, it's a theme. The theme of sending our kids abroad, I think, is one that many parents in Japan, we entertain that idea. Maybe one day I will, and a lot are doing it. But then a lot, for whatever reason, it doesn't happen. Maybe the kid goes overseas from university. I think there's a special kind of set of challenges that comes with setting a child younger. I even know people who send them from junior high, which is again a whole new set of things because that's even younger. But I think the high school model is not that uncommon, and it's one that a lot of parents have showed interest in or have talked about with me. So hopefully it would be of use to parents coming along behind, as well as people who are currently in that situation. Um, and it's somewhat ironic that in the middle of the coronavirus, it's no longer that easy to just jump on a plane, go see your kids. And
Yeah,
this year was
you talk about that in your Japan Times article about being a world citizen and thinking about whether to bring your kids back from New Zealand or they'd be stuck in quarantine is quite a big
tough.
issue. Before we talk about that, let me just add Mary's comment. She says, "Sounds like a book with plenty of interesting info parents would like to read on." Thanks,
Definitely, thanks,
Mary.
Mary. I think not every chapter will relate to every person, but even though I don't, for example, have a child with hearing issues, or I have a Japanese partner, we're not both foreign people. There are so many parallels and so many crossovers, and just oh wow, I didn't realize that, or okay, that's how that person dealt with it. I have learned something and taken away something from everyone else's chapter as well. So I definitely think there's something for everyone in this book. But just because it doesn't align with your particular situation, you'll still probably find insights in each writer's work. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Thank
great. I've been reading Karen Hill Anton's book, and
you. Right.
she's going to be on the series later this month. And she is of different from me and you raising our kids now. She did that 20 years ago in Japan, and still she decided to send her kids to high school abroad or maybe junior high as well. So I think this has been an issue for a long time for international residents in Japan. So
Right.
it's great to have this resource book.
I think Karen's book, by the way, is wonderful. I've been a fan of hers for many years. Well before I started to write the Japan Times, as a general reader, I used to read her column. She had a column called Crossing Cultures for many years when she wrote about a family, and I learned a lot from her. So I'm sure people will be excited to read her book as well. Uh, so I've always been a fan, Karen. She knows. Um, but in terms of our book, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us who live in Japan, we start off just assuming our kids will stay here and go to school here. That's what I always assumed. I was happy here. I knew the language. We're stable here. We didn't have any big plans to go back. So it's not like we set out to say we're going to send our kids to high school in New Zealand. As I say in my chapter, that actually didn't even come up as uh, it wasn't even on the agenda till about the second year of my son's junior high school. So he's the oldest. He was eighth grade. There began to be a couple of things that made me think, well, maybe with he has a larger than life personality. He still does. He's into so many things. Um, so my kids went to regular daycare and public primary school, shogakko, which was great. In general, most foreign parents find the shogakko really good. Then they get into junior high and things are a little bit more rigid. There's more rules. There's more, the style of learning becomes a little bit more like you sit and listen. The teacher talks. But I think it's when you get to high school that things really become, again, most kids hit that wall in the end of ninth grade. They have to do juken, the so-called, exam pressure. My kids got into a private junior high with a high level of English. It was just a school that had long had a name as being a school for attorney kids. It also attracted bicultural kids. A really nice school. They all enjoyed it. But I could see that as my son was going to go higher up, he could go up to the high school division with no exams. It was an elevated school. But from university, he'd have to sit exams. And I could see that rigid style that was going to sort of start pushing him into a box, what do you want to do? That was probably not going to be the best style of learning for my son. It wouldn't honor his way of learning and his particular way of looking at the world. And we'd always gone to New Zealand each summer. I put them in school when they were there because it was winter in New Zealand. We couldn't winter school. So they'd all had experience of being in New Zealand. And I knew my son fit in really well with his sporty, sort of outgoing personality. I'd worked really hard on keeping up the English. I write about that too, how we sent them, but this is what led up to it, because I think you need to know the background of the family. How were they able to facilitate the move? What did they do in advance? So even though we didn't realize we were going to do this, some certain things were in place. One was keeping an open line of communication with my parents, because my parents hosted the children. We couldn't have done it without the grandparents. There's no way we could have had them all boarding. Too expensive. So having that open line of communication with the grandparents or some family members who will be the ones hosting your children most likely is very important. And of course, having the English to do that was really important for my kids. They had a good relationship with their grandparents. For the study that I did for my background article in the Japan Times that led to this chapter, most of I'd say 95% of the parents I interviewed for that article, the kids were staying with parents, with grandparents. I think one was staying with an auntie and one was boarding. And in the end, my youngest had to board in New Zealand because my parents were getting a bit too advanced in years to have another teenager, but they hosted the older two for a total of 6 years. That's a lot for older people to host teenagers. As a parent, it's hard enough to have teenagers, but when there's one generation removed and it's grandparents, even though I think my kids are pretty good teenagers, it's still, it's harder on older people. And my parents, I give them immense, just a lot of grateful vibes, as well as awe that they did that. Because I'm thinking if my kids come back in 20 years time, hey, if you want to send our kids to you, I'm like, I probably have to think about that. My parents were so generous in welcoming the children. Yeah. And even though the youngest was boarding, she still went to their house a lot on weekends and during holidays. So definitely is a big shout out to the family members who are hosting your children.
Definitely. I think there's a lot in this book that hopefully will support parents who want to send their kids in Japan and some of the issues they might encounter, as well as you might choose abroad. But it's like so many things that we talk about in the series. You have to be flexible for what works in your situation.
Very much so. I mean, I think every parent in this book who is writing about, what they experienced, it's their own narratives, it's their own experience, and I think that comes out. One thing, it's not just the children who are learning, and not the children of the writers, it's the writers themselves, because none of us went to Japanese school. For all of us, the school experience in Japan began with our oldest child starting school. And, having not experienced a school system ourselves, it was very much a learning curve for all of us. And I think one takeaway is that staying flexible, there is this tendency to kind of like, oh, that's not how I would do it. Oh, my goodness. And one nobody really writes about the issue of bullying per se, but othering is definitely there in some of the chapters. I mean, a lot of us are automatically every time something happens to one of our children, oh, it's because they're half, or because they're not Japanese, or it might be because they have a foreign parent. I think we tend to sometimes take that sort of tiger mom, tiger dad, uh, and most foreign parents I know who have children going to Japanese school are doing great. Yes, there's ups and downs. Of course, there are frustrations, but they're same with Japanese parents. The same if our kids are overseas. Just different things come up, and um, navigating a school system with children in any country is not a picnic, but it just makes it that much harder when there's a level of, I'm not familiar with this system. I didn't grow up in this system. And the oldest child is always a pioneer. I found that very much with my son. Looking back, there were choices I would have made differently, but at the time I didn't know. And I had a new baby the year he started primary school. So I had a 6-year-old, a 3-year-old who was a very difficult little girl. My 3-year-old, my middle one was my wild child until she was about 8. Now she's just amazing. But and then I had a new baby on top of that. Plus I was a working mom and my husband was never home, the typical scenario. There were days I just don't know how I got through. That some days were just a blur. And luckily, my son was a really easygoing, friendly little boy, and he just took it in stride. But I'm sure there are things I could have done better to support him had I known. And at the time, I didn't. And I think that's the same with many of the parents. It's
Yeah.
very much a learning curve
Well,
for all of us.
there's so many good things about the Japanese school system, or
Right,
going
right.
to school, or being a teenager in Japan. I love that my kids are able to stay young longer, that they're not growing up too fast because they're in
Right.
Japan, and that's the norm for even high school kids in Japan.
That is a definitely a theme. I don't touch on that quite so much in I do have a little bit of a section though about differences in teenage culture in my chapter in particular. My kids in New Zealand were learning to drive by 16, and they were, there were boy girl parties. They're quite, I think these days are quite open. They're going to have parties, they're going to have a drink, they're, going to go with their boyfriends and girlfriends. So the school where my children went, half the kids were boarders. So half the kids weren't, living at home, they were living in the school. So the school took it very seriously. If there was a party, every parent had to be informed, and the school, told you that they were not going to take responsibility. If your child wanted to go and you gave permission, that was on you. But here's a host of, that they took a proactive stance because kids are going to do these things. So why not be open with it? So there was no like sneaking behind the gym with a can of beer or something like there might have been in our day. I don't know, but in New Zealand that was usually the norm. People didn't talk about that kind of thing when I was a kid. You knew it happened, but you just kind of kept quiet. But now my kids would go to parties and then have all the girls in one room, all the boys in another. And the kids stayed overnight because they could drink and it would be safe. So things like teenage drinking culture, driving culture. The kids had balls, which are like the school, like the proms you would have in the US.
It's that social stuff which I kind of miss for my kids, because they don't get any of that in Japan. In Japan, high school,
Right.
junior high school, it's just about school or about sports club.
Exactly.
That's your life. That's it,
But
right?
as you said, half of it is good. They stay younger longer, and that is one aspect. The other aspect, though, is in Japan, they're very much school takes up so much of their time.
Too much.
You can't even travel with your kids because
Yeah.
they're always, even if they're not in a juken year where they're studying at juku all day, they're probably every weekend moment that they have, even if they're not going to be like Olympic material, they're practicing with their local team, or or they're with their friends from the club. Kind of school takes over. Whereas in New Zealand, yeah, I mean, school was important, of course, but they had many opportunities to do other things. Like I mentioned, my son was always into many things. In junior high, for example, he played for the school basketball team, but he played American football for a club team outside. He was a Boy Scout with the BSA, with an international team. He was doing his Eagle Scout actually in junior high, which is pretty huge. He was also on a TV show in NHK. So I think it's no wonder he didn't study. But when he got to
But
New Zealand, that was the norm to do so
right,
many
yeah.
things,
That
to have at least 2 sports.
that is something I kind of, I don't really like about the Japanese system, is they make you just focus on one thing, which is
Right,
great if, like you said, you're going to be an Olympic athlete, or you're going to be a professional pianist or something, but
right.
I think having that diversity of experience in a lot of different activities is is I mean, for me, for my personal kids, it
Right.
seems more healthy, and they have
I think
friends in different groups. And
I think from a Western perspective, definitely that is something we do struggle with. I did write about, I've written about the club, the bukatsu phenomenon for different places too. The junior high school my kids went to, it had a, a Sundays. It was a Christian school. That wasn't the main reason we chose it, but it just happened they had Sundays off, so that was nice. And as I said, my son did combine many things. My girls not so much. They were in the choir club, and they also did handbells with the choir. And they loved it. It was great. So they didn't really pursue other stuff. But in general, yeah, I mean, kids in Japan is one thing, and it's not even that if you're going to be really good at it, one thing that's a great way to do it. But in general, the average kid is probably just in it for because everyone joins a club. That's what you do, and especially if you join a sports club, it's not even so much about being good at the sport. It's like the teamwork, the taking one for the team, showing up, even if you're not going to be in the game because you're still new in the team. You show up to cheer for the older kids. You show respect for the older kids. As you get up to the top level, then you show some team spirit by maybe coaching the younger ones and mentoring them. And I think there's that stickability, that gambaru thing. There's many aspects of it which are like sort of grooming the kids to be productive members of Japanese society. The clubs are kind of a microclimate of the wider society in Japan. I mean, things are breaking down a little bit. There is more freedom in some schools to not choose a club or maybe to pursue something outside if
one
you're into ballet or whatever. But
one of the reasons we chose to change our kids from public school to private school, not international school, but a private school with more of an English curriculum,
mhm,
was also because of the independent style of learning, having that what do you think in the classroom
right,
instead of just repeat what I think as the teacher, that rote learning transition to more
exactly,
international individual based learning, but also the school that they transition to has a stronger connection to community. And they give the kids, like the IB program, they give the kids credit for school for being engaged with the community.
oh, that's amazing. That's
Yeah.
really great.
So
Um,
we were really happy with that.
the school where my kids went for junior high is somewhat like that. The committee aspect, I don't think was. It doesn't sound as if it was as amazing as what your kids were able to experience, but definitely, the school had several levels of English, and the kids could study if they had come back from abroad or had a bicultural parent and had more English exposure. They could take a native speaker level class. So my kids did that. In the beginning, they wouldn't put my son in the native speaker class. They didn't think he was good enough at writing. So we struggled a bit with that. But by the time my girls came along, I think they realized I meant business. So my girls went straight into that class. And that was the one class my son really enjoyed and really engaged with because it was an inquiry based. It was not just write what I say or write what you think I want you to say. You're allowed to think about it, have an opinion, ask questions, use a computer for goodness sake, which most Japanese schools still don't do. I know Corona has kind of pulled Japan into the 21st century with technology, but I mean, most kids don't really start using a computer for their assignments until they get to university. I have students I teach at a women's university. I have students who still don't have a computer. I think most probably by now have got one because I realize you can't do
I
online
think
learning.
I think that's been a good soft push because of coronavirus, that people
Right.
have kind of moved into the 21st century a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's transition. We'll swing back
Sure.
and talk about the book at the end of the talk, but I'd love to talk about your articles.
Right. Right.
Let's talk about some of them from. Let's start with Kansai Scene. I love that you were writing about the new perspectives on old traditions about Kyoto's geisha, and
Okay.
you had some great insights there.
Well, I'm no expert on geisha, but I've always been somewhat fascinated by them. I have to say, I teach a course. I teach in the comparative studies department at the university where I'm working, Shiriyuri Joshidai in Tokyo, and one of my courses is modern Japanese culture. And a few years ago, I did a survey and asked my students if there was anything they'd be interested to learn about, not for them, but for the next intake. And one said, I'd love to learn about geisha and how to talk about geisha to foreign people. And I thought, what a great topic, because so many foreign people don't really understand what geisha are. A lot of Japanese don't. So I started researching it for my course, and I do a unit on geisha, modern geisha, and this kind of came along at the same time. I love kimono. I love getting dressed up. Every time I go somewhere for a trip, if there's an opportunity, I will get dressed up in a kimono and walk around. So, and I've had an opportunity to meet a working geisha, Anna Michael. She was just 16. She was the same age as my older daughter at the time. So sweet, and just a really different lifestyle that many of us don't understand. And they have so much discipline and so much. At 16, they have to be really committed because most of the young Michael become Michael after junior high. They don't go to high school. They start their training from that age. And it's just amazing in this day and age that there are young women out there who are committed to it. So I think the average foreign person probably doesn't realize how much goes into it, and that these days it's very much their decision, nobody else's. No one makes you become a geisha these days. You have to be committed because it's a long road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's, like you said, there's so much commitment.
Mm,
We talked a little bit with Paprika Girl and Dave and Osaka in the series about the dance style, the kimono style.
mm,
There's so much unique culture, which is so nice that it's being perpetuated. And it really does seem like the women are empowered. It's not as women being controlled, sexist kind of
right. I think
as
that's the
I
issue
first
people
thought,
have.
right? Yeah.
I think a lot of people probably watch Memoirs of a Geisha, which was a wonderful book. I enjoyed the book, and I was astounded that it was written when I found it was written by a foreign man, because he did it so convincingly. Um, but as a woman, I have to say, this really ties back into being a woman, a mom, and a parent, especially a parent of both girls and boys. A lot of my work, I love interviewing anybody, and I can make a story of anything. But I particularly enjoy interviewing women in general, just because there's often connections there. I do a lot of interviewing the Japan Times for their business section, where we interview just top leaders from different companies, foreign CEOs or ambassadors, people who are in some role representing their country or their company in Japan. And while everyone has a story, no doubt, it's I have to say I do interview less women because there are less women in top roles in Japan. Let's be honest. I often, when I've completed the official part, I often just want to sit there and keep talking with them. I've interviewed female ambassadors or female CEOs of companies here, many of them parents themselves, and it's just the conversation just keeps flowing, and just sharing insights. Yeah, that was the same for me. Or how did you handle that? There's this universal, I think, connection with women here. Um, we know that Japan has made a lot of steps forward, but it's still quite a paternalistic society. Just look at the lack of role models in politics, in the business world, in local government. There are women, but not many. It's still the exception rather than norm. And coming from a country where we now have a prime minister who is not only a young woman, she had a baby while she was in office, and she's raising her child. It's not particularly unusual anymore to be a woman or a mom in New Zealand in a leadership position. So I'm really glad that my girls had that opportunity to go to New Zealand and see a different model of being a woman, of being female. Um, there are many talented young women in Japan, and we both know that. We have kids, and we know that the rising generation has a lot to offer, but often they're stymied because the framework is just not there for them. And even though the government keeps pushing, women working, and let's make it easier for moms to have jobs, as long as they keep making it about women, about mothers, they're leaving 50% of the population out of the equation. The men raise children too. Most families in Japan have two parents. So if you keep making it about the mother, you're really just not helping the situation at all, because it's not about being a mother, it's about being a parent, about being a member of society. And I think that's where things still haven't really changed from when I was a young mom with kids. If my girls choose to come back and work here, great. But by the same token, I'm also excited that they have that opportunity in New Zealand. Um, right now with Corona, obviously, I can't just jump on a plane and go see them. But they are coming back for November for their summer holiday, the summer there. And it took some persuading. My older is in medical school, and she feels a big responsibility to do the moral thing. And she was worried about, traveling at a time like this, because we don't have much corona at all. New Zealand has really clamped down. It's very, very well controlled. People are going about their daily lives now. And everyone who comes into the country is required to do a 2-week quarantine at a hotel. You pay. And that's how they're keeping the country safe. Of course, tourism has ground to a halt, but we've only lost about 25 people. We've only had about 25 deaths, which is pretty amazing. So the people have been protected, you know.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
you were saying the hotel stay for 2 weeks was going to cost about 200,000 yen.
yes, it's
It's not,
about $3,100, I believe, per person. If you have a room by yourself, if you share a room, it's a little lower. If you share with a family member,
but
um,
the fact that they've, the leadership in New Zealand has been so good at
mm,
controlling the numbers that you kind of go around with your daily life because but
exactly.
the country is shut down, but
They just
within New
well,
Zealand,
New Zealand, everyone's going about their daily lives.
yeah.
Yes, people don't. The only people who wear masks now are in the hospital. The hospital and medical staff still wear masks. And I think if you're going to visit, you probably wear a mask. But and for my mother, who my mother is, now 80, and she can go about her daily life. She can go to church, go shopping, see her friends. She's safe. I have friends in the U.S. and Europe who are so worried about their elderly parents. Um, my girls, I know that they can, they can go to parties, go to out with their friends, and enjoy their life as young people should be without worrying. They're back. Well, my oldest is now, older girl is in the hospital basically. She's at that part of her training where she's not really in the classroom, but the youngest is still in her first year, so she can go and enjoy campus life. Um, so I'm
We
grateful. Yeah,
That's
yeah. But
great.
also, it's if I went back to New Zealand, I have to have that 2 weeks in quarantine myself,
Yeah.
which makes it really hard to, take that time on top of the time you want to spend with your family.
Well,
But
like I'm from Hawaii, and Hawaii is now negotiating with certain countries like Japan, where you don't have to do the 2 week quarantine anymore as long as you get a test. So I think we're kind of moving into another phase where things are
right,
opening up a little bit.
exactly.
We have a question from Mary. She says, "Are the parents crazy strict on kids and their education and future?" So going back to
Oh, it can.
insights, yeah.
Um, well, one thing that was sort of interesting, I actually wrote about this in my chapter. It was kind of an aha moment. When my son was in 8th grade, we in Japan you had these parent interviews, kind of similar to most schools in the West would have them too. In Japan they call it a sancha mendan. Sancha means three people, so it's usually the homeroom teacher, the parent, and the kid. You don't get to see your kid subject teachers at all, which is really unusual. In New Zealand, you do get to meet them in like an evening parents' night. So you should do everything for the homeroom teacher. So that homeroom teacher, having a good relationship with them is very important. Luckily, my son always had, well, my kids really had pretty decent homeroom teachers. So it was this homeroom teacher, my son, who was still 13 at the time, he hadn't even turned 14, and me. And his homeroom teacher asked, "What are your aspirations for university?" The kid is 13. He doesn't know what his aspirations are for the weekend, let alone university. And I was like, oh, okay. And another thing that the school where my kids went was a very much a arts oriented school, humanities. So people who graduated went on to typically English courses, global studies, international communication, social sciences, education, that sort of, not definitely not STEM subjects. I was warned by a parent of an older kid that if your kid wanted to pursue a science sort of career or a science course at university, you'd be better off to pull them out and have them reapply for a different high school. I'm like, they just sat the exam to enter from junior high. Why would we do that? But as we went through, I didn't realize that by putting them in that school to open up their English and give them perhaps a wider world view with kids who've been abroad and kids like themselves, which is wonderful. They did have that. I was also limiting their opportunities for that whole science, math, business side of study. So it wasn't till I went to New Zealand that I actually got in touch with their science side. And interestingly, all three kind of went that way. That my son did science and maths in his university, and he now works in business. He works for a company in kind of business mergers and acquisitions side, I guess, in Japan. The middle is in medical school, which would never have happened had she stayed in Japan. The youngest is doing law and business. So I don't think any of these paths would have been ones that have pursued had they stayed in Japan. I can't say for sure, but I'm 90% sure they probably wouldn't have. Um,
It's hard to say, but I think, as we said before, you make the best choice for your kids, for your family, for your area. Some areas
right.
have better school options than others.
Exactly. Obviously, yeah, that's true. I mean, in Tokyo, we have a lot more opportunities that we wouldn't have had we lived in other parts. My husband is from Hiroshima, from a small town, well, small city in Hiroshima, and it's a great place. I mean, I still consider it my Japanese home, my Japanese, sato. The first time I came to Japan, I was 18 on a working holiday in Tokyo. But when I came across, when I mentioned I was working, kind of training with that company, when I came across and met him, that was the area where I met him, his hometown. And we met, married there, and stayed there for 2 years. So I still consider that my Japanese sort of hometown. And I have a lot of friends there, and I have a great affection for it. But in terms of my children, I'm kind of glad that we decided to move. We moved to Tokyo and then actually went to the US for several years. So the children were born, two in the US and one back here, but all raised in Tokyo, which I think gave them just a lot more opportunities. I really do.
But
Uh,
we're in Hiroshima, and our kids are being
oh, okay.
raised very bilingually and
I
great
didn't know
schools.
that.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. My husband's from Fuchu. We lived in
Okay.
Fukuyama
Yeah.
for several years, so
Well,
we still go back and forth.
Fuchu is more the countryside area of Hiroshima, maybe
It's Inaka. It's definitely
Inaka. Yeah.
Fuji is Inaka. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a city. It's a bigger city than many cities in New Zealand,
Yeah.
but it's still the Inaka. So
Mary
I
is saying, I think it works. I see a big difference in Japanese youth compared to kids in the US. So, yeah, you do start to see, even in your own kids, you do start to see differences when they have experiences abroad.
right.
Uh, let's switch to one of your other articles from Savvy Tokyo. You've done some great articles with them.
I love
Uh,
watching Savvy. Aimed at women. I mean, men can read it too. I hope they do, but it is a community for international women, and it's just an amazing, just a great forum with so much fun and stuff, and deep stuff too.
yeah. I dug up your article about cleaning up and
Oh,
decluttering, which I think is so relevant this time of year. Can you talk about that a
right.
little bit?
Um, was that the one where I talked to Natalie?
Yes.
Natalie Bransma?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
Natalie Bransma is a Dutch woman who's moved around the world many times for her husband's job, and she has become an expert at decluttering. So I wrote that article about the time that the Kondo Marie, the KonMari boom. Most people have probably heard of Kondo Marie. She's a young woman who's made a career out of decluttering and tidying up. So she now lives, I think, in the US, and has pretty much moved her brand there. But not everybody. I love her books, and I have sort of decluttered following her style, but not everything. I didn't follow everything, and I just was interested to see, what can we take away from perhaps a more low-key approach. And one thing I noticed is when my youngest went to New Zealand, you reach a certain stage. It was really hard to declutter the kids' stuff when they were, still young, because there was always someone else coming along. Even though the oldest might have finished one stage, there was always someone else coming along. But when the youngest went to New Zealand, that was kind of like, well, I don't have anyone in the house anymore. And then when she graduated high school at the end of last year in New Zealand, again, that was another kind of, life point. Not only was she moving up, I was also moving ahead in my sort of parenting. I didn't have anyone the school system anymore. They're all going to be in university or working. So I think the youngest sets the scene when you're a parent of how much you can declutter, how much you can do. And one thing I did with my kids, that I'm kind of proud of, I didn't actually mention this in the article, but since we're talking about parenting and sort of raising kids, I started what I call just a memory box. It's just basically a big plastic case. It's nothing fancy. It doesn't have decoupage teddy bears or anything on it. Just a big plastic box like you get at the local home store that people put clothes in usually. And I just started a memory box for each kid. My mother was a bit of a hoarder, but she threw out a lot of my stuff, and I still can't get over it. My juvenilia, my little picture books that I made. I was a writer, poet, picture. I loved, very solitary little kid. I used to do art projects and write little books. Gone. I should have taken it back to Japan with me, and I never did. I just felt it was part of my home culture and left it in New Zealand. I really wish I had brought it back with me. But one year it was there, and about 6 or 7 years ago it wasn't, when they downsized. I think it just got chucked. It wasn't meant to happen. I'm sure she had no clue what she was throwing out, but it really hurt that I don't have that memory of my childhood anymore. So for my children, I've always decided that we would keep certain aspects of their, in a tangible form in a box. Not every single thing they ever wrote, not every picture, not every piece of work, but a selection. So going from early childhood in their, preschools, daycares in the States, and then hoiko in here, and then school, just in files mostly, because a lot of Japanese stuff is paper based. And my kids grew up in an era where still you got a lot of stuff coming from home from school with paper. So the first time they wrote their name in kanji, the swimming certificates, the ballet programs from the recitals, for my son, all his Eagle Scout stuff that we worked so hard on together, first ballet shoes, swimming
Isn't
certificates,
it
stuff like
lovely as
that.
well in Japanese school where the teachers usually send home a year's worth of
Um,
artwork or
right.
things in a
From
nice file, but even that can really take up space when you have one each
exactly.
year for each child, right?
I have to say for daycare they did. I found it very hard to track those. I think I kept a lot. And there's school books as well. Like the school books, I asked each child which ones they wanted to keep. Like because you bring your textbooks home in Japan, right? They're usually thin textbooks, not like the huge whoppers we had as kids. So for the Japanese school textbooks, what I did was I took their backpack, their set of the school book bag they all have, and I just filled it with as many books as it could hold, and then shut it and kept it. So something from each grade, usually their favorite subject. So it might have been science, it might have been maths, whatever, their favorite subject normally. So there's at least one book from each grade. So, they can go back and have a look. But I didn't keep everything.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine
And
the amount
in
of books?
terms of sustainability, it's always worth asking the school if they're happy to take back the textbooks or even the uniform. So like at my son's junior high, I asked the principal, "Can I give his old uniform? If there's kids who want it. I know it's a bit worn." And they were really happy to take it. Whereas other
Right.
schools about textbooks, they're like, "We have new ones now. We don't need
That is
them
the thing.
anymore."
The textbooks do change every few years. So for me, it was more like I don't have anything. Well, in New Zealand, you didn't keep your textbooks; they would just get handed out and then given back to the school. In Japan, they become yours. But I was just kind of bereft when I realized my mother checked everything out. So if nothing else, my children can never accuse me of not, holding on to some of it. But I don't have piles and piles of stuff. I have it all in a box, and it kind of goes from, well, babyhood really, all the way up to, I would say early university. That's probably where I stopped. I kind of felt that now it's up to them. So it's like a capsule of their childhood, and I'd always go through it with them, and every stage we would thin things down a little bit, and so it all fits quite nicely. I'm pretty proud of that.
That's
So
nice.
for me, that's a really good a way of
Decluttering.
manage
Yeah.
manage manageable amounts.
I
Yeah,
really liked your tip in that article that you got from the expert who came into your house. You're so brave to get an expert to come into your house for an article.
that took me a little bit of courage. Yes, I tied it up quite a lot before she came.
That was wonderful though. And then like I was thinking, how would I declutter? Like where is my plan? Where is my
Right.
schedule? And that was really useful in that article. Another article I think is very relevant for parents is your beautiful Obento article about Obento being Japan's edible art. And so beautiful. All the lunchbox pictures and
Okay, that was Kansai Scene, I think too.
mhm.
Yeah, that was again. I'm no, well, no bento expert. Obviously, I make bento every day for my children in junior high school. They could eat at the cafeteria, but the cafeteria food, once a week, I think was enough. Um, the people I interviewed for that article were pros. One of them was a young woman who's won awards, and one of them was a mother who has I think a cute bento side herself. But I mean, on a practical level, most of us don't have time to make a bento looking that great every day. And I think a lot of foreign parents are also, well, why would you spend so much time? But it's kind of a connection. It's almost like a sign of love for your children. Many of us we probably notice that Japanese parents don't hug their kids much, especially as they get older, maybe when they're tiny. But hugging the kid when you see them in public just doesn't happen much in Japan. Kissing your kid, especially for a guy, I mean, you rarely see a dad hugging and kissing his kids in public once they get past the baby age. So that was another way that a mom, it's usually a mom who makes it, can show love for her kid. And I'm not sure that I buy into that, but I do realize over the years as I was making it for 3 kids that it's a thing. It's taking and looking at what all your friends have got. Well, oh wow, her mom made a really good one, or oh, I'm kind of glad that my mom didn't do that one, or oh wow, mom was in a hurry today, I guess. And I had a little routine, where I would always bring something from the day before from dinner, always would plan ahead. So there was something the day before, something that I'd frozen myself, made and frozen. Usually I'd have one red or shopping, one commercial frozen thing, always a mini tomato for the red, always some broccoli for the green, and I had my little go-tos. But a lot of people probably don't realize there's a big difference in what girls and boys want. Little kids probably it's the same. Girls and boys generally would like the same thing. But for young teens, for boys, it's definitely substance. Definitely substance. I had to put extra onigiris in because my son would do sports and be hungry, you know. For the girls, it was more like it had to look cute. So sandwiches, crust off, stack them on their side, you know, and you have to do it very carefully so they don't move around. Fruit, I used to put the fruit in a little Tupperware for my son because his bento was so full with other stuff. No, mom, fruit goes in the. No, that's right. I put it in his bento, and I was told by the girls it had to go in a separate little thing. That was right. Yeah, I was told that was a thing. Girls have it in a separate little like dessert thing. Okay, but don't be too cutesy. Don't make it babyish, mom. Cute is okay, but not babyish. So you know, I was educated along the way by my children.
Yeah,
Um,
me too. And I was really happy when my kids were kind of disappointed with my bento efforts that they took it on themselves. And my son actually started making his own bento. And I was like, okay, good. That worked well.
I think if they had gone on to high school in Japan, I probably would have done that. I think for junior high, I kind of feel they're still kids. They're still little. And I don't know about your kids, but mine would have to commute. Their commute was about just over an hour door to door. They'd cycle to the station. They were commuting out of the city, so it was actually not that tiring for them. But they would go on the train and hop on a school bus. So, you know, they were leaving the house early on days if they had morning practices for something. Sometimes they had to go in early for like the choral competition, inter-school choral competition practice, stuff like that. If a child of 12 or 13 is leaving the house at 6:30 or whatever, I'm like, you know,
Yeah.
and they don't get back till 7.
Oh,
That's
that's a
in
really
New
long
Zealand, that
commute.
would be a high level executive stay, let alone a
Yeah.
12-year-old. That's tough. So I figure, you know, I cut them a lot of slack just because they had such a long day. But
Yeah.
I figure if it was high school, I probably would have at that point said, yeah, you make your own bento, or if you don't like it, just go and buy it at the cafeteria.
Yeah. Whereas my daughter is like super, I mean, we're vegan vegetarian family. So I've always sent bento, even if there was hot food, because they didn't have options. And that was something I had to
Right.
work out with the school, but making sure it's healthy, but also making sure it's something that the kids will eat. You know, your kids always have preferences, right?
Right. That was luckily mine were not too picky. My son especially would eat everything. He actually was vegetarian too for from 5th grade through to the end of junior high. He started eating meat again in New Zealand. He was playing American football there as well. People think oh rugby, not rugby. No, he played American football, and his coach was like, oh, you need more meat, man, you know, because I think my son was kind of going through a growth spurt, maybe outgrowing his strength, that kind of thing. So he did start eating meat again. And my mother, even though she loves animals, was quite happy because it was hard to cook for a teenage vegetarian grandson.
Oh,
But from
too
about the age
bad.
of 10 to 14, he was vegetarian. So I was sending vegetarian bundles for him. Yeah, it was a little challenging
Nice.
because a
Well,
lot of the.
I mean, that was something I actually got called into the nutritionist office, and they're like, "How can you only give your kids vegetables? You know, how can they be raised, healthy enough?" And then they saw my kids, and they're like, "Oh no, they look fine." You know,
My
like
son today
from birth,
is.
they were fine being vegan,
I
vegetarian.
do not think that being vegetarian for what 5 or 6 years of his life is in any way stunned. He's well, he's in his 20s now. He actually is back again playing American football. He's always played wherever he went, and he plays for a second division X League team. And let me tell you, he's one of the bigger guys on the.
No,
So
it's. I
I
mean,
do
they've
not think it's
proven
hurt him
it.
in any way.
It you don't need a meat or a dairy diet to be healthy.
Yeah,
So we
I
know
re-
that now. I think
I recently
20
tried to
years
be
ago it was hard.
I recently tried to be vegan myself. I've been vegetarian since I was 16, so a very long time. But um, I found Corona pretty hard, I have to say, to deal with. But one of the good things that came out of it was I started experimenting with being a vegan at home. So you know, my husband eats everything. He's not vegetarian, but he's happy to have soy milk. He doesn't mind. He wasn't a big cheese eater anyway, so I've given up cheese. I do buy eggs for him because I think he's had pancreatic cancer surgery, so it rejiggers your whole system basically. He's got a completely new digestive system compared to what he had 3 years ago. So
Well, let's talk
um,
about pan can because we only have
oh
a few more
sure,
minutes.
okay, thank you
Yeah,
for that.
go ahead.
I don't want to be negative about it, but it is it's a cancer that a lot of people don't know much about, and I think the latest famous person that might have got your attention was, of course, the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She had exactly the same as my husband. She had can you can have it in two different places. The head or the tail, but the I believe it's the Hep B more common. And she had it in the same place, and she got hers early too. They happened to be operating for something else, and they found it. She was older. She was 75 when she had her operation, but she was another example of someone who had it early. She had other issues going on too. Well, she had several different health issues, but she was a real shining light for early detection. And our pancreatic cancer communities and groups were really bummed. Well, bummed was not the word, really upset when she passed. Of course, she had a wonderful life, but that's what got her in the end, the pancreatic cancer, which really hurts. But it's a cancer that is very hard to detect early. The symptoms are not very apparent until it gets too late. And in many cases, doctors don't even know what they're looking for. And they just, oh, it's digestive issues. Oh, you've got a stomach ache. You've got this, you've got that. You have to be very, very proactive. My husband found out because he was losing weight. He's an athlete. He works out a lot. So when he loses weight, there's something going on there. So he had some tests, and they just happened to find it. If he hadn't insisted on having those tests, though, they wouldn't have detected it. So early intervention is very important. Surgery is currently the only real option, and it's very invasive surgery. But thanks to a great medical system here, and being in Tokyo, where he could access the best doctors, because the surgery is complicated. They take several organs. They take out some of your pancreas. They take out some of your stomach. I'm going to say it wrong. Not duodenum. That's not how you say it. You know what I mean? I'm not doing very well here with the words, but they take out several things and they suture it all together, and your body has to learn how to eat and process food in an entirely new way. They usually lose a lot of weight in the beginning. So even though this have the successful surgery, it's a huge step for them to come back. And he really has done really well. He's back doing all his activities, working full time, riding his Harley, triathlons, just enjoying life. But it's still, the recurrence rate is high. So every 3 months we go through scan study. I don't want to be negative, but you can never fully relax. I mean, it's all the back of your mind, and we don't talk about it, but we know. So when people like Ruth or Alex Trebek, the guy from Jeopardy, I'm sure many people know and love him. He got it too late to have the surgery, so he's it's eventually going to get him. It's sad, but the one thing you can do is catch it early, educate yourself, tell people.
That's wonderful. And it's great that you've highlighted this in your writing with Japan Times about
I
the charities or fundraisers.
um
Is it
there is
PanCan?
Yes, there's a charity in Japan called PanCan Japan. PanCan being pancreatic cancer. It's an offshoot of the one in the U.S. The guy that started it lived in the U.S. for some time, and he lost his own sister to PanCan, so he wanted to start something similar in Japan. And they have something called the Purple Run, the Purple Stride every year. Purple being the color for pancreatic cancer. And it actually would have been this 1st of November, but they had to cancel because of Corona. The hospitals usually get involved, so you've got people who are obviously treating vulnerable people coming and running or walking, and then you've got pancreatic survivors and their families show up, do the run, or come to cheer people on. So you would have had a lot of vulnerable people there, and that wouldn't have been a good idea in Corona. So they do cancel it, and it's rather ironic that the day they chose this year was my husband's 3rd anniversary. 3 years ago today, on that day, he was in surgery, and I was sitting there on tenterhooks with my friends around me to support me. And it was his hospital that was actually sponsoring it this year, because they take it in turns, all the big hospitals that offer the surgery. So it would have been his hospital this year. So it was a little bittersweet, but I totally understand why they cancelled. But yeah, this group has done a lot to advocate for Japan is risk aversive. So if you are the classic early stage cancer, they will operate on you. But they're very reluctant to offer it to people who maybe not the classic, maybe who have some, it's not stage 1 or 2, it's perhaps moved to another organ, but perhaps in the US or the UK or New Zealand, they might try and do the surgery or do some exploratory surgery. In Japan, they probably wouldn't consider it. So this group have pushed for new testing, new drugs, more awareness, just knocking on the door all the time. Hey, we're here, don't forget us. Because pancreatic cancer is not a sexy cancer at all. It's not a cancer people want to talk about. It's dismal. If you want to kill off a character in a movie quickly, you give them pancreatic cancer. I can't. So many movies I've sat through watching it, and then suddenly I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that this character was going to have cancer. And I'm sitting there crying because I'm remembering our own experience, and it's something I'm going to continue just waving my purple flag until, I don't have any breath left. Because if one person can get tested, if one person can realize, hey, maybe the symptoms that I or my loved one are experiencing could be that, and they can be saved, so worth it. Because right now, that's the only option we have, early intervention. And the book, we both Melody and I have been touched by this. We have a mutual friend who is been amazing in her fight, plus my husband, and any royalties are going towards pancreatic cancer research. So we're very happy that the publisher have also given us that, been generous with us in that. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, that is our hour. Thank you
Oh
so
wow.
much. Yeah. Thank you so much. And if you're interested in raising international kids in Japan and learning more about the issues, definitely check out the book. Don't forget the discount code below, which should be available on YouTube or Facebook. If you have any questions or comments, please write them below and we'll try to get Louise to respond as well. Louise, thank you so much for all the
Thank you.
articles that you write and keep us informed about culture and family life and life in Japan, as well as for this interesting and really helpful book. So,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much for joining.
Thank you for the opportunity. I do appreciate it.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for everybody on Periscope and YouTube and Facebook for your wonderful comments and questions today. I'm taking the rest of the week off, and I will be back next week with live streams from Tuesday. So please make sure and join us again. Thank you guys for joining, and thank you so much, Louise. Take care, everyone. Have a good day.